Welcome everyone. My name is Jenny Irons and I'm a Senior Program Officer here at the William T. Grant Foundation. Today I'll provide an overview of our Institutional Challenge Grant Program and provide some insights into what we look for and how we evaluate applications. Last year when we did this webinar, which was in March 2023, you can find it on our website, I offered a deep dive into each of the 4 goals of the grant. Today, I won't spend as much time on the goals, but I will highlight them and ask Adam Gamoran, our president at the William T. Grant Foundation, who's joining me today, and who also serves as a member of the Institutional Challenge Grant Selection Committee. I'll ask him to provide some insight into what the committee looks for when they review applications, and we'll do that for each of the 4 goals of the grant. So let's get started. Here's an outline of today's webinar. I'll give some brief background about the foundation and our funding interest, and then I'll spend most of the time, the first part of this webinar, talking about the goals of the Institutional Challenge Grant. We'll pause halfway through to take questions that you have about the first part of the webinar, and then in the second part of the webinar, we'll dive a little more into the application and review process. And again, at the end of the webinar, we'll take questions. You can submit questions at any time in the questions section of your dashboard. And again, we'll take those questions 2 times during the webinar, and people are monitoring that function. And also, please note that we're going to be sharing this recording in the next few days, so you'll get a notification about that when this goes online. The other thing I'll flag again partway through the presentation today is that the portal for applications opens tomorrow, and we'll also be releasing our updated application guidance soon. All right, so the William T. Grant Foundation was founded in 1936 by William T. Grant, and we support high quality research that is relevant to improving outcomes for youth ages 5 to 25 in the United States. In pursuit of this goal, we invest our research dollars in 2 focus areas. We fund research in our Reducing Inequality initiative that supports studies about the ways programs, policies, and practices can reduce inequality and outcomes among young people in the United States. And we also have a focus area that focuses on supporting research to improve the ways research evidence is used. And in this initiative, we support studies that examines ways to improve the conditions under which policymakers and practitioners use research evidence in ways that benefit young people. The Institutional Challenge Grant Program merges these 2 funding interests. First, it does this by supporting research practice partnerships, and it supports this because it's a mechanism through which research is more likely to be both useful and used. Second, the research agenda that is co-developed by the partnership is focused on reducing inequality in youth outcomes. The Institutional Challenge Grant Program was established in 2017, and the first grant was made in 2018. Since then, we have been fortunate to partner with other funders, including the Spencer Foundation, the Doris Duke Foundation, the Bezos Family Foundation, the AIR Equity Initiative, to enable us to support additional grants. In total, we have awarded 20 grants in 7 years, although I will note the 4 of those we hopefully will be approved by the board in the next couple of months. So I should say we've awarded 16 and 4 are pending. We're recommending 4 new grants to the board this year, which we're very excited about and we'll be announcing soon. I'm sorry, they have already been approved by the board and we're excited to announce them soon. All right, so let's dive into the goals of the grant. We ask grantees to pursue 4 goals with this grant program. First, in a research practice partnership, the university with a public agency and nonprofit organization builds their structure for the long term. So our hope is that these research practice partnerships will be mutually beneficial and will enable the partners to develop and pursue a joint research agenda that is relevant to the public agency or nonprofit organization's work over an extended period of time. The second goal of the grant is together, this partnership will pursue a joint research agenda to reduce inequality in youth outcomes. The partnership's research should aim to build, test, or increase understandings of programs, policies, or practices to reduce inequalities in academic, social, behavioral, or economic outcomes for young people ages 5 to 25. The grant also asks universities to create institutional change to value research practice partnerships. The research institution should design a feasible strategy or strategies for institutional change that can address the observed structural, motivational, and financial barriers that can often inhibit research practice partnerships at the university level. By establishing structural supports and incentives that encourage skilled mid-career researchers to conduct joint work with policymakers and practitioners, the university will develop an environment where partnerships can thrive. Finally, the fourth goal is to enhance the capacity of both partners to collaborate on producing and using research evidence. Through new experiences that foster deeper understandings of a given policy or practice context and deepen relationship with partners, grantees on the research side will enhance their capacity to participate in effective partnerships. At the same time, the public agency or nonprofit organization will enhance their own capacity to partner with researchers, as well as understand, conduct, and use research through activities such as technical assistance, infrastructure improvements, or staff trainings. This is a challenge. It is called the Institutional Challenge Grant, and it is ambitious, but we believe this is what is needed to produce and use research evidence in relevant ways. Now I'm going to walk through each of the four goals with a little bit more detail, and first we're going to talk about research practice partnerships. Right now, I do want to pause and say, remember that this webinar will be available online in the coming days. We'll post it for everyone to share and look at, and please do post your questions throughout in the question and answer function. I also want to note that we've provided some resources for you, which you should be able to see in your little toolbar right there, both our application guidance and a resource page, And the reason I want to draw attention to that now is one of the things you'll find on that resource page is that we have a microsite that provides a number of resources about research practice partnerships that I encourage you to check out and to use as you prepare your grant application. One of the things you will see there is that we define research practice partnerships as long-term, mutually beneficial collaborations that promote the production and use of rigorous and relevant research. In other words, research practice partnerships adopt a long-term view, persist beyond a single project, involve relationships between institutions, not just individuals, and benefit both parties. So let me pause now to turn to Adam Gamoran and ask him to share with us, in particular, in terms of what the selection committee members are thinking about, is there an ideal time for a partnership to apply for this grant?
Hi, Jenny. Thanks for inviting me in today. You've asked a great question. What is the time for a partnership to apply for the Institutional Challenge Grant? You know, it's a bit of a delicate balance because if a partnership is so nascent and the partners have not really worked together, it's difficult to convince the selection committee that there really is a partnership there. On the other hand, if a partnership is so mature, has been around for so many years and has aggregated so many funds from so many different sources, the committee will ask, what is the value added of the Institutional Challenge Grant to this long-standing partnership? So somewhere in between those two extremes is the happy medium. Very often we support partnerships where individuals have partnered for a long time, and this grant allows them to formalize the relationship between the two organizations as a partnership. In other cases, the partnership has been around for 2, 3, 4 years, has laid down some principles, and again, this grant enables them to take the partnership to the next level. So that gives, there's no hard and fast rule, but that may shed some light on your question.
Thanks so much, that's super helpful. So let's turn now to the research agenda. The second goal asks partnerships to pursue a joint research agenda to reduce inequality in youth outcomes. And this is where we're going to dive a little bit more deeply today, because this is an area where, frankly, applications sometimes fall short. They aren't providing the kinds of details reviewers need to assess the strength of the research agenda, or they don't have enough details fleshed out between the partnership to really demonstrate how they're going to go about answering a particular question. So I want to spend a little bit of time now talking about our interest in supporting research to examine ways to reduce inequality. The partnership together, as I've mentioned already, but I just want to underscore this, has to conduct a research study or perhaps multiple studies to answer questions, again, that are relevant to the public agency or nonprofit organization, but that seek to build, test, or improve programs, policies, or practices to reduce existing inequalities, right? So one of the things that you have to do in the research narrative for your proposal is identify specific inequality or inequalities in youth outcomes and show that outcomes are currently unequal. So for example, perhaps you want to tackle an inequality in racial disparities in a school system in discipline referrals. And so that's the kind of thing you would want to document very clearly in your research agenda. So again, and I want to underscore that as a foundation, we're particularly interested in research that seeks to reduce inequalities on the basis of economic standing, race, ethnicity, and immigrant origin status. We're also interested in research that addresses ways to improve outcomes for LGBTQ youth. So in constructing your research narrative, you want to pull in literature that establishes how and why outcomes are unequal, what the inequality is, and then you make a convincing case for how your study is going to address that particular inequality. Are you going to examine programs? Are you going to develop a program? Are you going to test a program that already exists to figure out whether or not you can reduce inequalities in youth outcomes? I do want to underscore that we're interested in supporting work that uses a range of different types of research methods, from qualitative to quantitative to mixed method studies. We welcome descriptive studies that might clarify mechanisms for reducing inequality. We also welcome studies that examine and test program or policy interventions to reduce inequalities. So please know that we're interested in a range of work. We're also interested in work that examines ways to reduce inequalities across youth serving systems. So this can include education, it can include the juvenile justice system, the child welfare system, mental health. And of note, one of our funding partners, the Doris Duke Foundation, is particularly interested in supporting partnerships that are engaged in research that seeks to prevent children and families from coming into contact with the child welfare system. So I encourage applicants or interested applicants to take a good look at the resources we provide, not just on our institutional challenge grant part of our website, but also our major grants sections of our website that are focused on our reducing inequality focus area, because I think you'll find some good resources there to help you think about how to develop your research narrative. Here are some examples of current partnerships that we're funding. I'm not going to leave this slide up long. Again, this will be shared in the coming days on our website. But what you can see in these funded studies, the partners are pursuing different questions and using different methods to answer the questions they're asking. University of Toronto is in fact ended up carrying out 3+ different studies to answer the needs of their partners at the Puerto Rico Department of Education, particularly to improve educational outcomes for youth in Puerto Rico. Johns Hopkins University has partnered with the Fort Belknap Indian community to conduct mixed methods research to develop a culturally responsive intervention to prevent youth suicide in the Fort Belknap community, and really has incorporated the use of an advisory board of Indigenous people and to develop a way to think about how to have a preventive strategy to prevent youth suicide and improve youth mental health outcomes overall. And then the final example you see here is the University of California, Santa Cruz has partnered with their local United Way to really center youth participatory action research to improve local outcomes for Latinx youth from low-income families in the larger Santa Cruz County. But they're also working to improve graduation and retention rates for first-gen students at the University of Santa Cruz by involving them in research with community partners. So I want to highlight now one of the resources we've recently developed for our website to help all of you think about how to develop a strong research agenda. For all of our grant programs, and most recently for our institutional challenge grant program, we have annotated successful proposals, excerpts of proposals, to highlight for you the ways in which applicants are successfully meeting the criteria we have for our grant applications. And these are just, obviously you can't read these, but these are examples of 2 proposals. We've annotated excerpts of their research narratives. They'll be online in the coming days. They'll be shared with you. In fact, you'll have that link when you receive an alert that the webinar has been shared online. You'll receive a link to these annotated excerpts. One of, excuse me, one of them is a more quantitative study. The other involves youth participatory action research. And they give you an example of how partnerships are laying out their plan for research in their narrative, even when, such as in the case of youth participatory action research, the questions they are asking might evolve over time. So let me turn back now to Adam to ask if you can share a little bit of insight about how selection committee members are looking at these applications when they're reviewing research agendas.
Thanks, Jenny. This is another tricky question, which is, I guess, why you asked me to address it.
That's right.
Because what's tricky about it is, on the one hand, the Institutional Challenge Grant calls for partnership-based research, which means the research agenda should reflect the needs and experiences of the community partners. On the other hand, the application must say enough about the research for selection committee members to judge its rigor and its contribution. So there are a couple of ways of responding to this. In many cases, where a partnership has been around for some time, the research agenda is already underway. So the application is an opportunity to codify this research agenda and then to explain in some detail how the research would be pursued, what the sample would be, what methods would be used, what data would be collected. In other cases, the partnership is considering a range of research activities. In a case like that, and part of the planning period for the grant would be to finalize the research agenda. In a case like that, it's essential to provide some indication, perhaps some examples. This is the kind of thing we're considering in as much detail as you can, again, because the selection committee is charged with reviewing the rigor and contribution of the research. And so even if final decisions about the research have not yet been made, it is essential to say something about the sample, about the methods, about the data to be collected, about the analysis plan, and then go on to say something about how the findings of the research would be used, and that would be part of the capacity building part of the agenda. So walking that tightrope between having a well-crafted research agenda that gives the committee something to judge, but on the other hand, ensuring that the voices of community partners are evident in the research agenda, that's the balance that you need to strike in a successful proposal.
Thanks, Adam. Thank you. Yeah, and certainly the committee members are well attuned to reading these research agendas with an eye toward thinking about the extent to which these questions are emerging from the partnership and from the community partners and not just from the researchers. So thanks so much for sharing that information with us. So let's turn now to the institutional change portion, which may feel like it's the greatest challenge for potential applicants. And let's dig into this a little bit more. So while research practice partnerships can be very rewarding for faculty, and we hear a lot of people talking about how passionate they are about their work in research practice partnerships and how meaningful that work is to them, we also know that research practice partnerships are time intensive and require supports from the institutions involved. We also know that policies and practices within universities can inadvertently create barriers to a partnership's success. So the Institutional Challenge Grant is a direct response to these obstacles because it not only merges our interest in supporting research on reducing inequality and improving the use of research evidence, but it also acknowledges that we recognize universities aren't always hospitable environments for conducting research practice partnerships. So the institutional change goal of this grant asks research institutions to examine and redesign internal policies and practices in ways that encourage sustained institutional partnerships with public agencies or nonprofit organizations, in ways that incentivize exceptional researchers to initiate and pursue rigorous and relevant research agendas, and in ways that improve the partnership skills of researchers. We have seen our current grantees generate bold and creative proposals for institutional change, and some examples you see listed on your screen. Some of them are taking on tenure and promotion policies, but not all of them are. Some of them are creating university centers or creating small grant programs to support early stage partnership work. So I'm going to turn back to Adam again to ask him another difficult question. Adam, can you talk a little bit about what makes a compelling strategy for institutional change?
Sure. Look, there are many university faculty who are committed to community engaged scholarship. And indeed, many researchers go into their line of work because they want to make a difference for universities. And yet, community engaged scholarship is often not valued or incentivized within universities, and this creates barriers to faculty participation in community engaged work. So in the Institutional Challenge Grant, we're challenging universities to shift in ways that value and incentivize faculty participation in partnership-oriented engaged scholarship. So what can universities do to pursue this aim? Well, Jenny has listed several examples of the kinds of strategies that we've seen. Some universities have indeed taken stock of their promotion and tenure and career advancements provisions to think about how community engaged research might be evaluated, what constitutes a marker of quality, how can we know, when we assess the contribution of research to further research, we obtain quantitative markers like citation counts and qualitative markers like testimonials from other researchers. Oh, this research influenced my research. Well, in principle, we could do the same thing for public impact research. We could identify mentions or use of research in legislative deliberations or in policy documents, and we could solicit testimonials from community partners on how the research impacted their work in the community. But tenure and promotion are not the only ways of addressing university incentives for engaged scholarship. And we've seen many other types of examples. We've seen administrative positions devoted to supporting outreach and partnerships. We've seen seed grants for community engaged research. We've seen leadership that provides space for community engaged research. Course buyouts, summer grants, establishing of centers, raising the profile of community engaged research, as Jenny has indicated, offering prizes, collaborations across systems are all examples that we've seen of how universities can support community engaged scholarship. So I think an exciting application will explain what the university is already doing or what the university's commitments are and how those commitments will be enacted and have added value through the awarding of this grant. Let's face it, many universities would like to receive the Institutional Challenge Grant because it demonstrates to the university leadership the external value of engaged scholarship and brings in research dollars that can support that kind of work.
Thanks, Adam. And maybe now that we're focused on this, I just want to share that given our work in this space, we've been excited to be in conversation with others at different foundations, associations, different universities who are really very much interested in transforming universities and higher education to better support and incentivize partnership research. And there is, in fact, an upcoming National Academies workshop to think about this very issue in June. I believe the public announcement of that was just released, and my understanding is that it's possible for folks to join virtually and attend that as well if you're interested. But it's an exciting national conversation and really international conversation taking place around this right now. So let's turn now to the final goal of the grant. The final goal of the grant is to develop the capacity of both partners to collaborate on producing and using research evidence. Research we have supported at the foundation on the use of research evidence shows that one of the barriers to using research to inform policy and practice of public agencies and nonprofit organizations is a lack of capacity to do so. It's quite simple. There's capacity in terms of time, resources, and or skills. Conversely, university researchers are not typically trained to be good partners, and they often do not have the time or skills to engage in productive, co-developed research. Thus, the final goal of the grant is to enhance the capacity of both partners to collaborate on and in the production and use of research evidence. Among our current grantees, some of the capacity building activities include the kinds of things that you see on your screen. So for example, in one partnership, they're building the research skills of folks at a local United Way organization to support youth participatory action research to address community challenges. Another partnership is conducting joint presentations to raise problems of practice and known research to address problems. Some partnerships are working on strengthening data systems and research evidence to address the functioning of organizations to better serve youth populations. In some cases, the partnerships have embedded research positions at community partners so that there is a long-term strategy and a person leading the use of research evidence within a community organization. This capacity building work in the Institutional Challenge Grant is typically carried out or largely carried out by what we call mid-career fellows. So those of you who are interested in applying for this grant have read the application guidance and see that there is a role for mid-career fellows. It is a required component of the grant. On the university side, mid-career is defined as 8 to 20 years since the completion of a doctoral degree or residency for university fellows, and 8 to 20 years of cumulative experience in a current role for policy or practice fellows. Fellows should be established in their careers with significant expertise and clear contributions to the project. Mid-career fellows need requisite skills to carry out the proposed work. So this includes not only conducting the research, but also building the partnership and the capacity building work within the project. So you can see here on the screen that what should happen in your application is that the project plan should clearly show how you're allowing time for the research fellows to significantly extend their skills as effective partners. And conversely, it should also include a feasible plan for leveraging fellows to increase the capacity of the public agency or private nonprofit organization to use research evidence in ways that support improved youth outcomes. What we're going to do with the next two slides is dive a little bit more into how the funding structure works for this partnership, because this is also often a point where we get a lot of questions, but it's also time to unpack a little bit about what the logic is for having a mid-career fellow work on this grant. So I'm going to turn back to Adam now and note that this is often a place where applicants have questions about the grant, both in terms of what a mid-career fellow does, but often in terms of the funding structure. So as Adam is talking, I'm going to shift to the next slide. It's an illustration of the ways you can think about funding for mid-career fellows, and it's something that you also can find in the application guidance. So Adam, I'll turn to you now to talk a little bit more about mid-career fellows.
Sure. So the first question is, why mid-career? Why are we encouraging, in fact, requiring scholars in their early between 8 and 20 years to be involved in the research? Well, on the one hand, this is not a retirement activity. This is not something to shift to at the end of the career, because we want the experience of engaged scholarship to be something that carries on for many years. On the other hand, there is value in beginning in the early part of the let's say, young senior career, the early senior career, because first of all, for a junior faculty member, there can be risk involved in participating in engaged scholarship. But even if one is working in a university context that values and knows how to evaluate the contribution towards career advancement of engaged scholarship, there are actual skills that one learns during the probationary period that are important. And in addition, a researcher will have more visibility and credibility in the field and be better positioned to pursue engaged scholarship once he or she has established himself or herself in the profession. So that's why that's the argument behind reserving this role for the mid-career, those between 8 and 20 years post-PhD. Now, the grant pays for 2 FTEs of a mid-career fellow, and the university is required, that's another challenge for the university, to pay for 1 additional FTE, but those FTEs can be chopped up in many different ways. We do ask that anyone who is appointed as a mid-career fellow be working in the fellow's role at least half-time during the period of appointment. So if you're a mid-career fellow even for 1 semester, you need to be appointed at least for 50% during that semester. So many universities structure, many ICG winners structure the mid-career fellows with, say, 1 person works full-time 1 year and different person works full-time another year. Others do 2 people working half-time for 2 successive years. We do offer the option, and many grantees take advantage of the option, to have a community fellow, someone working with the community organization as the mid-career fellow, and the specific eligibility requirements are laid out in the application guide. But again, many grantees use this then as the second fellow, maybe a half-time community fellow and a half-time university fellow, each for 2 years, and then an additional university fellow paid for through the university's funding. So there are different ways of structuring it. The chart that Jenny has put up shows the different ways that these positions can be allocated, but ultimately it gets down to 2 FTEs funded from the grant, 1 FTE funded from the university over a 3-year period, and then each appointment would be at least half-time during the time of the appointment. Jenny, does that answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Adam. So we have got through the first half of the webinar. We're going to pause now to take any questions that have come in, and then in the second half of the webinar, we'll talk more about the details of the application process and the review process.
Yes, so
keep
those. Yes, we have some questions already, and keep them coming in. I'll start with one question that came in advance, and I guess this is going to be part of the second half of the webinar, but maybe just as a heads up, Jenny.
Sure.
Someone has asked, a participant has asked, what split in terms of dollars is required between the research institution and the community partner institution?
Great, thanks. So one component of this program is that applicants or grantees may have up to a 9-month planning period. Adam mentioned that earlier in answer to the question about developing a research agenda. This is a time where you're really nailing down details about your partnership and how you'll work together, but also really thinking about finalizing details of your research design. And again, this can be up to 9 months. And in that period, we ask for that 9-month planning period that the grant dollars are spent equally. It's up to $60,000, and that's equally divided between the 2 partners. But in terms of the remainder of the grant, and again, we'll dive into those features in the second half of the webinar, the way that you divvy up funding is really up to you and should align with the work you're conducting and the plan you have for the partnership overall.
Yes, additional questions have come in. Should the proposed institutional change to value research practice partnerships be limited to the research topics supported by the William T. Grant Foundation?
It does not have to be, no. Our goal really is to support change at universities. So the change strategies are supporting research practice partnerships across a school or college in which you're focusing your work, or across the entire university. So it does not have to be limited to the foundation's funding interest. I mean, of course, the work of the funded partnership will be, but that does not have to be true of other partnership work that you support at the university.
It's a question that responded, I think, to my comments about the mid-career fellow and the university match. Can the university funding be in kind? And I think I'll take this one since it follows up on my remarks. So the university funding can be in kind as long as it represents support for a researcher who is released from other responsibilities to pursue the research in the institutional challenge grant. So if by in kind you mean release time for a faculty member, the answer is yes. If you mean other kinds of support, the answer is no, because the university's contribution is to support a faculty member, a mid-career fellow, to pursue research on reducing inequality in youth outcomes in partnership with the other organization. Okay, so more questions have come in. Jenny, is there space for multidisciplinary centers to be expanding capacity to partner with multiple community partners in this grant versus only partnering with a single organization?
So I think there were maybe two different things I heard there, but absolutely a number of our grantees are working from their place as a multidisciplinary center. One example would be our grant to the University of Virginia, where the locus of the institutional change work and the partnership is at their equity center, which is a multidisciplinary center. Can you have multiple community partners? Yes, you can. I would just caution that you want to keep that probably at a manageable number. So one of our partnerships is between the UT Austin and again, their lead PIs in the Department of Sociology, but is really the locus of change from a multidisciplinary initiative there. And they're partnered with the local district attorney and 3 small nonprofit organizations. So that's a case of a more complex partnership. However, I will note for the application, only one of the organizations should be the co-PI for the grant, like the lead co-PI for the grant. So for example, in the case at UT Austin, the lead PI, and this is the case for all the grants, is someone at the university really leading institutional change, and the co-PI is the president CEO at one of the small nonprofit organizations. So you want to think about strategically who will be the co-PI for the grant.
Thanks. And here's a question I started to answer in writing, and I'm going to click send. But before I do, I am going to give an explanation. So the question was, is it accurate that fellowships cannot be stretched over 1 year to be a 1-year 25% position? And if you were hearing me a few minutes ago, the answer to that is accurate. Fellows must be appointed for at least 50% during the time they're appointed, although they can be appointed for less than a year, e.g. a semester. So that's what I said in writing. But to explain why, the theory of action here is that unless you're spending at least half your time at any given point in time, you're really not working enough to be deeply engaged with the community partner and with the research agenda posed through the shared interests of the community partner and the university. So that's why the argument is that the mid-career fellow should be a 50% appointment during the time the individual is appointed. We always get a lot of questions about whether we're going to be sharing this webinar subsequently. The answer to that is yes, as Jenny has said. So here's a question for you, Jenny. Can internal center, e.g. the University Center for Multicultural Affairs, serve as an external community partner? How about community colleges in the same area of the PI's institution? I think the answer might be different for those two examples.
Yes, so I would say no, but Adam, correct me if you think differently. No to the first one. An internal part of the university cannot be the community partner, but community colleges, yes, could be.
Exactly. Let's see. There's going to be questions about application dates. You're going to cover that soon. I think I have one last question for you, Jenny, from the questions that have come in, is about can the ICG be used to test and evaluate tools and technologies that are developed as part of a youth service coordination program.
Yes, unless I'm missing something. I mean, yeah, a youth service coordination program to reduce inequality, as long as you're laying out the case for how that is true, that seems, and the work you're doing is informed by research, that seems like a potential fit, Adam, unless I'm hearing differently.
Yeah, I mean, if the rest of the goals of the ICG are met, certainly the research agenda could focus on testing a tool or technology that's developed as part of a youth service coordination project, but it would have to fit within the context of a partnership with a research agenda developed jointly with capacity building and with institutional change. But otherwise, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, Jenny, we are ready for the second part of your remarks, and I promise to the others that didn't have your questions answered, they're all going to be answered in the second part of Jenny's remarks.
That's right. So we'll turn to the application process now. This part of the webinar is shorter, so we have a little time at the end for more questions and answers. The Institutional Challenge Grant. The initial award is $650,000 for 3 years with a possible 2-year renewal. Thus far, all of our grantees have been successful in securing that 2-year renewal. So ultimately, because they are demonstrating and making progress towards achieving the 4 goals of the grant, and we want to continue to support them in doing that. So ultimately, for those grantees, it ends up being an award of $1 million over the course of 5 years. As we mentioned earlier, it includes up to a 9-month planning period for the partnership to submit how they'll work together and the research agenda they will carry out. The grant also supports research dollars that you might need to carry out the co-developed research agenda. Again, as Adam mentioned, there's the research funding goes towards supporting 2 FTEs for mid-career fellows at the university and or the practice organization. Dollars can also be used to support capacity building activities. So for example, trainings or other things that might take place to support the capacity of partners to produce and use research evidence. I want to note that, as is the case with our major research grants, there is an indirect cost allowance of up to 15% of the total direct cost. And then finally, as we went over before, there's support for 1 full-time equivalent fellow for 1 year should come from the university. And Adam explained earlier, if it's in-kind support, what that looks like. Universities sometimes also secure additional grant dollars to cover the cost of the 1 FTE for another mid-career fellow. All right, so let's talk about the review process, but also most importantly, the question that has been asked. Applications are due September, I see an error. They're due September 12th of this year, 2024, not 2023, by 3 p.m. And also important to note, our portal opens tomorrow, May 16th. What that means is you can begin working on your applications in our grants management system, Smart Simple, but applications are not due until September. We encourage people to take a lot of time on these applications, to work very closely across your partnership to develop these applications. When you submit your application, you will be submitting your full proposal, not just a letter of inquiry or some abbreviated part of that. So it is a complex application that includes the full proposal and includes a 4-page structured abstract. There are guidelines for that in our grants management system. And this is a really important part of your application because the structured abstract is what we use initially when we do an internal round of review to screen in or screen out applications that aren't meeting our 4 main criteria or meeting the 4 goals of the grant. And you include all agreements or letters of support from your university. So that's really important that, that is a quite complex and thorough grant proposal. So what happens with our review process? As I mentioned a minute ago, initially when the grant applications come in, we do a fairly quick internal review of the 4-page structured abstracts to make sure your application is eligible to be considered. And then we send eligible and competitive applications along to our selection committee members. I'll talk a little bit about the selection committee in a minute, but this is the one grant program we have at the foundation, our one research grants program that is reviewed solely by members of our selection committee. These applications do not go out for external review, but are reviewed by our very thorough and thoughtful members of our selection committee. Each proposal that moves forward through our review process is reviewed by 2 members of our selection committee. And then we have, depending on their recommendations, we have a meeting with our entire selection committee in person here at the foundation in December, where finalists are selected. And so again, I want to reiterate how important that 4-page abstract is, because when we have that meeting in December, they're often reviewing a lot of applications, as I already mentioned, and you know this if you're working on an application. These are long, complex applications. So at that stage, what happens in the meeting is the 2 selection committee members who have read your application are sort of the experts on your application, and they share their assessment of the application. And every other member of the selection committee at that point will have only read your structured abstract and perhaps some other supporting materials in your budget, but they're not looking at the full proposal. So do bear in mind that structured abstract is quite important, to use that as a way to succinctly illustrate how you would go about achieving the 4 goals of the grant. So in the December meeting, finalists are selected, and depending on the number of co-funders we have, we bring in anywhere from 3 to 6 or 7 finalists to come in for in-person interviews in early February at the foundation. When we decide how many finalists we're bringing in and who the finalists are, we then ask those finalists to prepare a written response to any concerns that have been raised in the review process, and they also use the reviews they've received to prepare remarks for the in-person interviews in early February. I am excited to share, and we've shared this online, that as a William T. Grant Foundation alone, we can only support 1 institutional challenge grant per year. But thanks to a longer-term agreement with the Bezos Family Foundation, we know that over the next 2 years, we'll be funding at least 2 institutional challenge grants. And of course, we always hope to have additional funders join us as well, so that we can support 3 or even 4 institutional challenge grants, as we have been able to do last year, and again, hopefully this year, pending, and as we have done this year. All right, so this is an old picture of our selection committee, but I'm sharing it with you to show how nice and friendly our selection committee members are, and also how accomplished they are. We have folks on our selection committee who are experts in research areas, who have served in leadership roles at their universities, so really able to bring insights into our review of institutional change processes. They have also worked in policy and practice roles, so have an understanding of what it takes to build capacity at nonprofit organizations and public agencies. And of course, we also have representatives from our funding partners join us for the review process as well. You can find the list of our current selection committee members on our website, so it can give you a sense of the range of really wonderful people we have joining us in a very thoughtful and thorough review process. So let me move now to a slide that gives you a sense of things that you might want to keep in mind as you prepare your application. Because our goal is that at the end of 5 years, each partnership will have established a set of strategies that facilitate sustained research practice partnerships with public agencies or nonprofits, that the public agency or nonprofit will have increased its capacity to use research evidence, that researchers will have improved their partnership skills, and the research that's been generated will have been used in decision making, and it is likely to lead to improved outcomes for youth. We've seen that our current grantees make great strides in achieving the goals of this grant. Our very first grantee at Cornell University has been successful in raising funds to achieve all of these goals, with the first goal especially in expanding the capacity of Cornell to support sustained research practice partnerships. We have one of our current grantees at Northeastern University has been really successful in their partnership with the Boston Mayor's Office in supporting and evaluating a youth summer employment program. And in fact, in recent months, the mayor of Boston announced that this year, for the first time, that her office will support any qualified student from a public school in Boston to connect them with an internship if they are interested and eligible. So, and in fact, in the press release where she announced that, she cited the research at Northeastern. So that's been quite exciting. I do want to point again to the many resources we have on our website to support you in putting your application together, including our Research Practice Partnership microsite. And again, remind you that you should see in your toolbox a list of resources that our communications department very kindly prepared for you to help you think about resources that align with different goals of the grant. And I just want to end by noting that we especially encourage proposals that are led by Black, Latinx, Indigenous, and Asian American researchers and others in leadership roles. We welcome multidisciplinary and mixed method studies, and we certainly welcome resubmissions. I think at this point, 4, maybe 5 of our current institutional challenge grant grantees were awarded their second time after they incorporated feedback from their first round to become successful in being institutional challenge grant recipients. We have just a few minutes left. We're glad you could join us today to learn more about this grant program, and we'll take a few final questions. So Adam, back to you.
Yes. Will we be sharing the Q&A and answers that are coming from this webinar? Well, the questions that were answered orally will be shared as part of the sharing of the webinar. The Q&As that were answered in writing will not be shared subsequently, but we do have an FAQ section on the website under resources for applicants for this grant application. Our team's notified when proposals move forward to the selection committee. No, we don't have a separate notification for that. The last date for applying is September 12th, as you saw. The link for applying is in the handouts that are listed in this webinar, but also on our website. The PDF will not be emailed, but a link will be provided where you can download the PDF or view the webinar subsequently. Those are the questions that have come in. Let's see. So are there other questions that we can answer? Yes. Do you want identification of the applicant's racial or ethnic background in the proposal?
So we do, when you register in our system to be a PI, that is a question that is asked. And prefer not to respond, many folks do. We don't require that to be named in a proposal, but, and we also, we don't require positionality statements, but that is sometimes something that is addressed in applications across our grant program. So I will also note that in the first part of the grant application, when applicants are talking about their research practice partnership and how they work together and the kinds of things they want to work on, many applicants do acknowledge power dynamics that may come from, you know, differences that result from being part of a university versus being a nonprofit organization, or that perhaps come from different positions in terms of social identities. So certainly that is something that you might decide to include in your proposal narrative, although we don't require it. And should you wish to think about power dynamics in research practice partnerships, we do have a number of resources on our website to help you think about that. I would also encourage folks to check out the National Network of Education Research Practice Partnerships. Even if you aren't pursuing an education research practice partnership, they also have a lot of really wonderful resources that could be helpful.
Thanks, Jenny. Great answer. Are there any other questions that we can answer before wrapping up this webinar? Jenny, a question that we often get is about the how detailed the research agenda should be. Could you comment on that?
Sure. I mean, the general answer is it needs to be detailed enough to convince the reviewers you can successfully answer the questions you're asking and carry out the work you're proposing, and that it is meaningful to the nonprofit organization or public agency in answering questions they have. So certainly they're going to want to see as much detail as possible as you have about the sample, as much detail as you have as possible about the research design. And meaning that it is quite important. So if you're carrying out, if you're proposing to, let me give you an example, if you're proposing to test a program, whether or not it works, it really is an effectiveness study where you want to judge cause and effect, then, you know, think about the kinds of things you need to share there to convince reviewers that you know what you're doing and that you will have the data that you need to answer those questions. So in cases like that, reviewers often want to see power analysis. They want to see that you really understand the strengths and limitations of your methods. They want to have a clear understanding of the sample that you have. If you're carrying out qualitative work, then they'll really want to get a strong sense that you have a well-developed plan for collecting your data and analyzing your data. So again, that's why I encourage people to check out the resources that we also provide for our major grants program, because even looking at that guidance, I think, can give you a strong sense of the kinds of things that selection committee reviewers will be looking for in the research narrative for these applications as well.
And a last question, could you talk about the different domains of youth services where we might see applications, where we have seen applications, or where we hope to receive applications?
Sure. So it would be no surprise to any of you that the majority of the applications we receive are focused on education as a youth serving system. That is the system in the United States in which all youth are involved in one way or another. We also, like predominantly, that's where a lot of our applications come from, but we're excited this year that we had applications that were really taking on work in other youth serving systems. One of the grants that we're funding this year, which I won't say much more about because we're waiting on a few things to announce this publicly, is in public health. Another one of our grants is working with community partners, between university and community partners, is looking to support employment opportunities for young Black men through community organizations. We're interested in seeing work that's focused on immigrant youth, that again is looking at ways to prevent contact and engagement with the child welfare system. We love seeing applications that are tackling ways to reduce inequalities in the juvenile justice space. And we've seen a number of really interesting proposals come in that are thinking about the ways in which gun violence disproportionately affects young people, particularly young people of color. So, and those are ways in which, if you were tackling the problem of gun violence, for example, you might think about working through the mental health system, the education space, or perhaps other community serving organizations. So I just want to underscore, we're really, really interested in work across any system that touches youth lives, whether it be employment, child welfare, education, juvenile justice, community or neighborhood organizations. So we encourage, your good ideas and your creative approaches to improving youth lives.
Thanks, Jenny. Great answer and a good one to end on.
Adam. Great, thanks. And again, thanks so much for joining us. We hope that the resources we provided will be helpful to you, and we look forward to receiving your applications in September.